So,
do y'all want me to start?
Yeah, I mean, I want to maybe just say a few quick words about Truth Telling Project and just welcome everybody. My name is Dave Ragland, and I'm just going to change my pronouns up here. And I'm one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of the Truth Telling Project. And I'm calling in from Canarsie Land. And I just want to welcome you all to the Radical Truth Teller Award and share with you all that we started this project, the Radical Truth. Well, we started the Truth Telling Project firstly in Ferguson, right after Mike Brown Jr. was murdered. And it started as a truth project to address, to essentially address police violence and use truth and reconciliation and specifically focus on truth telling as a way to tell our own story and to impact what could be the outcome of people who experience police violence. And since that time, we've had a series of hearings and created curriculum. And we've done quite a bit of work around researching and looking at some of the root causes and creating policy and impacting policy and doing a lot of work around reparations as we launched the grassroots reparations campaign in 2019. And to date, we're doing work around education, policy, and a lot of activism and a lot of work in reparations. And I want to welcome you all. And I want to tell you that this Radical Truth Teller Award started as a project called Support an Activist. And in Ferguson, we learned that for various reasons, political reasons, Ferguson activists weren't being supported. People who were experiencing police violence and fighting up and standing against police violence weren't being supported. And so we gathered people who were willing to support, and we began supporting activists each month. And we raised money for them. And recently we've been able to support activists with an amount that is supportive of them and that gives them their flowers while they're living, while they are in the midst of doing important work for our people in our community and for this nation. And so I'm really honored to be here with you all. And I'd like to acknowledge that today we are in the beginning of LGBTQIA month, and want to honor our queer and trans ancestors who got us here. Polly Murray, Marsha P. Johnson, and so many, and Bayard Rustin, and so many others who make what we're doing possible. And so I want to turn it over to our Truth and Reparations Fellow for Activism and Ferguson activist, second wave Ferguson activist, Amber Walker.
Hey everybody, sorry I'm like in the middle of trying things on, so that's why I have on weird clothes. I'm Amber, pronouns are she, her, in New Orleans, which is Choctaw native land, and amongst some other ones. And I'm happy to be here with you all. I actually nominated this truth teller this month, Sade Dumas, who is a New Orleans native and also a longtime activist, organizer, and boss extraordinaire in the area. She is the former executive director of Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition, a coalition designed to, of course, reform the jail and prison system here in Orleans Parish, and also just has done amazing work over the past, I believe, 5 to 7 years in the community to help stop jails being built and continue to organize around policy and electoral work here in Orleans Parish. And I moved here about a little under 2 years ago. And, Sade was a name that I heard pretty quickly in this community. And I now call her a friend, very proud of the work she's been doing. She's now working with the Borealis Project in philanthropy, helping to grant money to people doing work all in different social justice sectors. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to welcome her into this space. And Sade, as we do every month, we give our Radical Truth Teller time to just share the work that you've done, share your heart, why you got into this work, what, the work that you've done past, what you're doing currently. And yeah, just your purpose and mission in life. And then we'll ask questions and, just see how we can support you as well as you continue to go. And yeah, that's basically it. So I will pass it over to you if no one else has anything that they want to add, and we'll let you share.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Quick question. How much time should I speak? Because I need to put containers on myself. I can go on and on.
I mean, what do you all say?
A 5 and a 10, like, just let me know and I can fit the container. I just need to know. David,
whatever you want.
Yeah, whatever you want, just
minutes?
go.
I don't know.
Yeah, do it.
Okay.
I mean, give some time for questions, and we're gonna end at 8.
Okay.
Oh yeah, 7 Central. Yeah.
Right. All right. So my name is Sade Dumas. I am also, as Amber said, located in New Orleans, born and raised. I come to all of the work that I do because I grew up in a city that was the most incarcerated place in the world. At one time, New Orleans incarcerated 5 times higher than a national average. We had 6,500 people in the local jail. The jail was run as a prison. The jail was even named Orleans Parish Prison. And a lot of the work that I've done with other advocates have brought that number down to 800 today. So, this is close to me because I know a lot of people who have been in the local jail. My previous partner was in that jail, and I have a brother who's incarcerated. And people who know me really well know that family is the most important thing to me. And I see incarceration as a threat to families. And we know how important families are. If families were not so important, Black families would not have been torn apart during the period of slavery in the United States. Prior to doing this work, I worked as a parent educator, and I saw how many single Black moms were suffering in a system. So a day in jail, a few hours in jail, could lead to someone's children being taken away by DCFS. It can lead to someone losing their job. It can then lead to eviction because a lot of people in New Orleans are working and living paycheck to paycheck, are been released for something as simple as not paying a fine or a fee, something that doesn't pose a risk to public safety. People have to work a DCFS case plan, find a new job, find a home, because you can't get your children back without a home. And seeing moms tell their children, "I'm sorry, I will never leave you again," as instructed by their therapist, it triggered me because those parents did not leave their children. They were torn apart from their family members for something that, because of capitalism, because they were too poor to pay a fine or a fee. So I come into this work largely because of family, because of my family, and because I see other families who have been ripped apart because of this. As Amber said, I'm the former executive director of the Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition, and we work to do 3 things. We work to reduce the number of people incarcerated, improve jail conditions, because New Orleans was known as one of the most dangerous jails. There's a consent decree right now. Actually, there are two consent decrees, but I think people ignore the old one. So it's consent decree on top of consent decree. Lots of deaths in that jail. And we work to promote alternatives to incarceration, because if we could take money away from the jail and a prison system and from over policing, we can then put that back in the community and stop crime on the front end without throwing people away. Some of the things I did at OPPRC, when I came, it was a group of amazing volunteers just ready to throw down, but we did not have capacity to keep the work going with one person working part-time. So I worked to raise money, to turn the organization into a 501c3, to really get our message out there. Now, a lot of people, I'm organizing in Louisiana. It's a very red state. New Orleans is faux progressive. We like to pretend that we are, but we're not really. And anyone who could look at our jail and our streets and everything else would see that. So finding a way to speak to people about what matters to them was the largest way we were able to bring people in. Maybe you don't care about people in jail. Maybe you care about the streets. That sucks, right? I won't say you're a horrible person. You just have your own priorities. But what it means is if we were to spend $54 million on a new jail, we can't fix these streets. So some of the things we were able to accomplish in the last 5 years, we stopped a jail expansion. We sued the former sheriff for illegally operating a jail, a temporary detention center. We worked to make New Orleans one of the top 5 places in the country for jail reduction during the COVID-19 era. We got judges to sign a non-bank order, led a campaign and won this campaign to make New Orleans the 3rd place in the country to ban tear gas against protesters after the uprisings. We do a lot of mutual aid. I always feel like if we're raising money for our community, it should go back to the community. And the number one way to prevent crime is to make sure people are economically safe. We just did a lot of stuff, a summons ordinance, right? Why are we bringing people to jail for things that don't pose a risk to public safety? And we also stopped informational checkpoints during COVID. These checkpoints were only in Black areas, and it was a month after the pandemic, because apparently only Black people didn't get the memo that we were in the middle of a pandemic and we needed to mask up, right? So we were able to stop those unconstitutional checkpoints. And just last year, work with partners, we were able to change the narrative around public safety in the city and unseat a 17-year sheriff incumbent who had just terrorized our community members in the jail for far too long. And I think another significant thing last year, we started our Help Not Handcuffs campaign officially to create a non-police crisis team. So no one would go to jail for suffering with a psychiatric disorder. In New Orleans right now, over 80% of the people in the jail have a psychiatric or substance abuse disorder, and over 90% of the people in that jail are Black. So what that tells me is Black people are not getting the tools we need to thrive in a society, and then they throw us in cages and make money off of that. So a lot of work has been done, but the work continues. The work continues until we're all free, until we are not relying on jails to cage human beings, and until we can put money on the front end to protect people. And by protect people, I mean creating safe alternatives like affordable housing and mental health resources, right? Food pantries, all of those things that lead to public safety much more than over incarceration. So this is actually a jail, but it was run like a prison. There was a tilapia farm and everything on the top of the old jail buildings. And I should mention some of the biggest work that has been done to reduce that jail size is when the sheriff wanted to build another 6,000 bed facility to replace Hurricane Katrina damaged buildings. OPPRC fought to cap that at 1438. And the importance of limiting the physical building, jails are the physical embodiment of white supremacy and capitalism gone wrong. And so when we limit the number of beds in a jail, we force every criminal legal system actor to rethink their practices. A judge can't throw someone in a jail because they don't like the way they look in front of them if there are no beds. So they have to really think about how to use those beds. And shrinking the size of the jail, shrinking that structure allows more people to be home with their families. So right now I have transitioned to Borealis Philanthropy. I'm the program director of the Spark Justice Fund. I'm building out this fund that focuses on pretrial detention. And prior to being on the Borealis team, I was a grantee partner for the Communities Transforming Policing Fund and the Spark Justice Fund. I am so happy to be in this role to get resources on the ground, specifically to organizations led by people who look like me. I remember being a 23-year-old first-time executive director who just didn't know how to talk the talk to get the funds. And for many years, I was the only staff member. I was the making it into a 501c3, building the board, leading the organizing, doing the fundraising, the finance, and it's draining. And I want to make sure that other people doing this work, doing this righteous, much needed work, do not have to go through all of the hoops I had to go through to get the resources, to get the people on staff to get it done. So a lot of what my work will look like is hiring more folks, focusing on strategic communications to enhance what the fund is doing and get more money to people on the ground. Because for every problem we have in society, capitalism has used jail to replace them. Like we know jails are the #1 mental health facilities, are the most used mental health facilities in our country right now, and that's a problem. And another thing I'm looking into is how do we get more money to rural areas? So there are a lot of people in jails and prisons in the suburbs and in rural areas. 20% of people in the United States live in rural areas. Only 5% of dollars from philanthropy are in those areas. But if you go to an area where the jail is the largest employer and you say, we want to shut this down, there's a lot of backlash. A lot of people want their jobs. So it's going to take a lot of us coming together, people fighting for racial justice, people fighting for economic justice, and people looking for a new way to do things. We're going to have to come together and, look at these places where the largest jail expansions are happening, and it's not the big cities right now. I feel like I've just gone on for a while, but the last thing I'll say is when I walk into a room, I'm committed to walking in and bringing my community with me. And with everything I do, it is rooted in my community, it's rooted in my faith and my love for Black people.
Period. That's all I have to say. I'll open the floor up for questions or for thoughts.
And before we go on, I just want to, number one, thank you and for sharing that and extremely powerful work that you're doing. And I want to redirect people quickly to like one of the most important reasons for this. And it is to support the activists, you who are doing this work. And so if you can drop your Venmo, we're going to provide you with an honorarium to continue your work for you personally, to care for you. And so you can do whatever you choose with it or encourage people to donate to wherever, but I encourage you to drop your Venmo in, and I encourage people, if they want to donate. And the entire month we'll be asking people to Venmo Sade or Cash App or PayPal or Zelle, whatever. So I want to open up with questions. I have one, but I will wait for other folks to chime in with questions.
Uh, I was gonna say, I'll start real quick just because I don't have a question yet. I'm still processing all of that wonderful information. I just wanted to say, Sade, thank you for the work that you're doing. I mean, to hear all of those amazing things, it just resonates with so many feelings and experiences that I can't even imagine the time it has taken, the energy it has taken, but I appreciate everything that you are doing. And I think it is wonderful. And I will reflect on some of the things you said and probably come back with something more valuable to provide. But I just really wanted to thank you for everything that you're doing and for sharing that with us. I think it's a part of that storytelling, truth telling, just so we can learn all about all the efforts going on and how we can contribute as well. So I appreciate you.
And I'll go ahead and say that you, in the work that you did and the work that you're doing, continue to show what's possible. And that's something that is rare when it comes to people actually being acknowledged for the work that is done and the dedication that it takes to actually persist through all of the adversity and all of the obstacles that come up and all of the straight up opposition to your very existence. Especially as a Black woman, a Black young woman in that role, leading in that fashion, being a leader, inspiring others to join that work. I mean, just, yes, a wholehearted thank you for that. I'm currently incarcerated, serving a 50-year sentence. I am a prison abolitionist, and I see restorative justice and community building as avenues towards making abolition a safe possibility. And it does take, everything that you were talking about building community, about bringing people together and leaning into the interconnectedness that exists between us, that's what it's going to take in order to heal, in order to be able to grow, in order to be able to create a collective narrative where we can move forward in a way that is together, as opposed to all of this polarization that we're living in. Your work and your presence is a testament to what is possible. So thank you. But I suppose I'll throw a question out there. From your experience and the work that you've done so far, what is one step that small organizations can take to supersede the capitalistic pull to engage in competition for resources, so that work together in order to be able to meet the needs of the people that you're working towards? How can you work together in order to be able to take that step towards a collaborative approach to meeting needs as opposed to competing for those contracts?
That is an amazing question. And I wish I had a direct answer. And I say that because there were many times that I was doing the work on my own, and there was a larger organization that took credit to funders. And I didn't know this, but although people on the ground knew Sade and they knew Arlene's Parish Prison Reform Coalition was doing the work, the funders they're not on the ground, right? Like, they're national. And if a funder simply said, we would love to see a news article highlighting this campaign you said you won, those people would not have been able to make a lot of money off of the work and leave us as an under-resourced organization with one staff member for years. And, I think it's a mindset thing and it's a leadership thing. And we can't always control the leaders in other organizations, but what we can do is scream our truth and have the community scream our truth. And when more people started to see the work happening and more people started to talk about it, it became really hard for someone to write a grant report with work that I had led. So I think that's always going to be a problem. I think the fix is getting more people involved in the effort. Also, really happy to see you here. With everything, I always say we have to have people closest to the problem in the mix. Like, I refuse to do this work without other people who are directly impacted by the problem. So I'm really happy you're here. Thank you. I also wanted to mention opposition. You were so spot on about opposition. The opposition became so fierce last year that during the sheriff race, the sheriff had a video ad against me. And I never thought that I would be the target of an ad. Like, I'm not an elected official, never plan to be one. Just want to like keep organizing in my community and doing what I have to do to liberate Black and Brown folks in the United States. And so there was a period where during the runoff, there were cop cars outside of my house for a few days, and my community stepped up and like took care of me, offered me places to stay, offered to create like a support train outside my house where like 2 community members would sit outside for a couple of hours in their car and they would rotate. And so opposition is real, and I'm so interested in finding more ways to support Black leaders doing this work as I'm in this new role.
That shows the power that you have.
Yeah, Sade, that's beautiful, the work that you do. I think you're short selling yourself when you call it opposition. This is intimidation. This is above opposition. And it's wonderful that the community came out and supported you during that time. I mean, this is KKK stuff, basically, I have to say, and it's scary. And you're a strong and sensitive and important member of your community.
I'm curious about what might be some of the upstream actions around school to prison pipeline. Like what might be some of the ways in which your organizing is able to have leverage before kids get to prison, go from one prison, the education system, to another prison, the incarceration system?
Love that question. There are so many groups doing organizing for juvenile justice out here. And in New Orleans, 100% of our schools are charter schools. And
America.
yeah. And it's a problem when so many people are in a classroom and they're not there because they love children, and they're not even certified, but they're working because if they stick with this thing for 2 years, X amount of their student loans are wiped away, and it's a resume builder. So, I think that for New Orleans specifically, the number one thing we can do to fight against the schools to prison pipeline is fight for our schools back. And that's going to be a long battle, but I think we can do it. Hurricane Katrina just created a climate in New Orleans, or an atmosphere where everything was blank and people were able to just take over, and some not so great people took over.
Thank you.
We should also stop divesting from recess, right? Like, we look at other countries and the students have 15 minutes of playtime for every hour of work. And like, we know that children need to play, children need to talk, children need to like scream sometimes, right? Like, they're little people with big emotions and they're trying to regulate it. And sometimes we don't regulate our emotions, and we've been around for a long time. So expecting little people to do that with so few years of experience is unrealistic. And we really have to think of ways to stop having children punished for being children. Like, children are allowed to have bad days, mental health days. If a first grader hits another first grader, okay, let's resolve that. But that child should not be, given some punitive punishment for not being able to communicate. Like, they're little people, they haven't learned it yet. So we just have to like give grace to children in our homes and really be up on the teachers. I'm saying all of this because I have it all prepared for one day when I'm a parent. I'm like ready to go in there and like, yeah. Amber knows.
Yes, Sade is ready to be a mom.
Do you two work together, Amber and Sade? Do you
We-
do?
Yeah, so I met Sade through, so I work for a sheriff reform and abolition organization. Our goal is to help folks around the country hold their sheriffs accountable. And we do that through electoral work, and we do in policy, through our national work and campaign demands that we've created together as a coalition. So the electoral work, which was what Sade talked about in terms of beating that 17-year incumbent, is how we met. We helped to, we helped to join the PAC that Sade and local members had started to raise money and campaign for or in support of the now new sheriff and against the 17-year incumbent Guzman. So that's how we met through the PAC. Yeah. So I know all these things. I don't really have any questions. I know everything. I know all this stuff. We talk all the time. So, but yeah.
I have a question about reparations. I'm curious, how do you see reparations playing into this work, and maybe how it's connected to abolition?
Really good question, really complex question. I believe we should absolutely have reparations, and I don't know what form that would come in. Like, I don't think Black folks should have to pay to go to college. Like, we built this country. We built everything that this country has, and we weren't compensated for it, and there's systemic racism that still keeps us down. But we also know that the bar keeps moving, right? Like folks with college degrees are coming out and now making like $11 an hour, and people are requiring master degrees for people to like make very little money and not a living wage. So I know there are a lot of groups doing this work for reparations. I'm smart enough to know when I don't know something. So I'm always down to sign a petition for those groups, to show up for protests for those groups, and to explore what reparations would look like during this period.
Thank you.
So I'm still kind of hung up on the how to give credit where credit is due. But I realize that that's a bigger problem, and it ends up, it can easily end up taking a lot of the passion and a lot of the energy out of where it needs to go to actually get the change done. Basically do the work and let other people care about the credit. So finding that balance is a whole other fight in and of itself. But when it comes to helping people see what they don't want to see, what mechanisms or what practices or what tools have you found to be most effective in helping people shift their perspective and open themselves up to a new understanding of something as tough as, hey, there's this guy who's been torturing people for 17 years, he needs to go. Or, hey, we have all of these people who are, stuck in horrible conditions. But it's really easy for people to turn a blind eye to that when they're barely getting by themselves. So how have you been able to help people see those truths, those lived experiences, when they don't directly reflect their own?
Yeah, I always say my job is not to convince anyone, it's to share the truth and to demonstrate the power that we have collectively when we're ready to move things and shift things. So a lot of the times when we started campaigns, we would always have community sessions, like community listening sessions, but the conversations weren't just one way, they were both ways. Because in order to speak to people's concerns, we have to know what those concerns are. And a lot of times we leave out people who are victims of crime from the conversation when we know that a restorative justice approach where you're censoring victims of crime is like the best approach. And that typically people who are victims of crime don't want punitive measures themselves. They want like to be healed. They want like wholeness most times, not all times. And, you know, one example of that is when we started our Help Not Handcuffs campaign, we were immediately hit with opposition. Why would you send a social worker to a 911 call for someone with a mental health, dealing with mental health issues? You're going to get a lot of dead social workers, is what one radio host told me. And, you know, just different things like that. And I'm a numbers person. So, I very quickly, there were 25,000 people from the Cahoots program who received help through Cahoots. Police backup was only needed 250 times. So if we're looking at that, we can really take police out of the equation most of the time, right? And so just providing people with data, it's not for us to change people's minds, it's for us to expose the truth. And I think when we expose the truth, people who are well-intentioned will change. There's also something with trauma. At all of our learning sessions, we would always have a clinician, like a mediator, a social worker, someone with a trauma-informed lens to like have conversations with people, because these conversations can be triggering. It can be super triggering for someone who has lost a loved one to hear that we want a smaller jail, because people are thinking, what the heck, you want a smaller jail? Like you want criminals on the streets? But when we talk about the cycle of incarceration, locking people up where they have no resources, throwing people back on the streets and saying you're barred from every resource, that doesn't create a safe community. And I don't know if this is a great example, but I've never been one to be politically correct. I've always said, if I have to feed my child, I'm gonna do what I have to do to feed my child, right? And so I think we put people in a place where they have to fight for their survival. And that's what leads to increased crime. Like these systems we've set up for people to fail. So it's really having the patience to talk to people, to expose the truth, but also process with them why the tough on crime rhetoric has never worked and why it's not working now. Because if locking people up was the answer, the United States would be the safest country in the world. And we're far from that. Like we're scared to go to grocery stores right now. We're scared to send our children to school. So yeah, no convincing, just sharing the truth and demonstrating power. Because another thing I've found is some people are apathetic. Some people, I've gone to knock on doors, and it's one lady said, don't knock on my door anymore. I'm not signing another paper, another petition, because nothing happens. And those are the people you need to sit with if they let you, right? If they don't curse you out, it happens. You need to sit with them and, have conversations of, actually, we can create change. This is what happened when 500 people showed up and protested on the lawn at City Council. There was the moment where the sheriff wanted to expand the jail. City Council members were not meeting with us initially. We purchased tents, we purchased mats, and we had a sleep out in 40-degree weather in front of the City Hall. And we attracted so much media attention that council members looked bad if they didn't want to meet with us. So then they met with us and we were able to stop that expansion. So we have to demonstrate that we have the power. We have to flex that power for people to say, let me join this because I'm powerful when I'm with these people and I can create change when I'm not alone. I'm sorry, that was long-winded, but I hope it answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. One more question, Ludwig. So how do you convince people who are you knocking their doors to tell the truth? So how do you convince them to tell you the truth? Yes.
I'm lucky because New Orleans is a real friendly place. People will invite you into their home, and it's not an odd thing, but I don't always look for them to share their stories first. I know if someone asked me about my ex-husband who was in a jail, I don't, well, now I do, but initially I would not always say what that story was or how that affected our lives. And, you know, I didn't always tell people about my brother who's in prison. And I think this movement moves at the speed of trust. And so sometimes you have to prove yourself first for people to open up. And I think that's fair. And if we really want to build this movement where we trust each other, we have to trust people's boundaries and people's comfort level and know that not everyone's going to be an open book, and that's okay. And food always helps too in the South.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you so much for everything you've already said. It's been incredibly inspiring and powerful to hear everything you've shared with us today. And you've obviously are very much, taking on so much. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. I wanted to ask, I've heard this quote before that, coalitions are both crucial and hard to build. And it sounds like you've had to do a lot of that work to be as successful as you are. And I was wondering if you had any insight into building like networks of people in order to like either regionally or communally to meet your goals. And if you had any tips about how you can go about creating those connections.
Now, the hardest thing with our coalition was this battle between abolition and reform. Now, reform's in a name, and that name reform was there long before I came. And, the history of the coalition was New Orleans had the most dangerous jail, and there were a lot of ICE holds, like a lot of people detained for ICE in the local jail, and people saw the abuse and they said, we need to stop people from getting killed. We need to stop people from being assaulted and raped in this jail. So it started with that. It started with reform. And then there was this great awakening that the fewer people you have in jail, the fewer people are subject to the violence of Sheriff Marlon Gusman. And that's when the decarceration work started happening. But a struggle I faced in the last 2 years after the uprising, a lot of people who were not close to the problem came in and wanted to take these positions of leadership, even going as far to say, let's change the name of this coalition. Now in 2020, we won a lot of campaigns. Like we have a 2020 wins sheet on the website. We won so many campaigns, but I was the only staff member. And I said, if I have to choose between spending time to go through a name change process with this membership versus freeing Black people in the middle of a pandemic where people are dying in jails and prisons, I'm going to free these Black people, and I'm going to let y'all do that performative stuff on your on your own. And names mean a lot, right? But the messiest thing in this coalition was the verbiage of reform versus abolition. So I would always remind people our goal is to reduce the number of people incarcerated, improve jail conditions, promote alternatives. Not everyone's a hard up abolitionist, but most people agree that there are a lot of people in jail who don't need to be in jail. And I think we meet people where they are. I absolutely was not an abolitionist when I came to this work. I thought abolitionists were out of their mind. How dare you? What are you going to do with all of these people? And it took me coming to the movement and people loving up on me to show me another way to change my mind. So we can't deny people their own journey and their grace. Another part of coalition work is just stopping people from killing each other. And that's just hard. So I would just be quiet and keep people away from each other. And speaking to people's interests, we had 50 small business leaders sign on to our letter in 2 days to tell the judge to appeal, tell the mayor to appeal the ruling from the judge to build a new jail. And the way we spoke to the business owners, we said, you want your tax dollars going on this? FEMA's not going to fund us, right? And so we really have to meet people where they are and speak to them where they are. a lot of businesses were suffering due to the pandemic. And so speaking to them about their tax dollars going on a new jail is not what they wanted. So coalition work is really speaking to what people care about and bringing them in under like this shared vision. And not all of the vision has to be shared, right? But there are some small value things or some huge value things that people have to agree to before coming to the table.
Sade, you mentioned that there are people in the prisons who do not belong there. Do you have any interactions with the people like the Innocence Project?
The Innocence Project of New Orleans, they're actually a coalition partner. So coming in, I knew that we needed to build a base and have as many people at the table as possible. So over the years, I was able to bring it from 15 organizational partners to 60. But we had 9 core groups. And these 9 groups were the groups like we could sign their name on a letter, they're gonna jump when we jump. And other people participated as it was a good fit for them, because sometimes people said, I don't agree with this thing, it's too radical. That's okay, jump in when the movement feels right to you. We have to give people the autonomy to participate in a way that's meaningful to them. And that goes from organizations to people, right? Like if their only skill is baking cookies, we need cookies when we're protesting. It's really hot outside, we get really hungry. And so finding a way, I always say we have the power. We were created with different gifts because we have different things to contribute to this world and to the movement. So if someone likes to drive, we need people carpooling to the meeting. If someone likes to bake, in the South, we always have food at our meetings. So how do we let people participate in a way that feels true and in a way where they know that their gift made a difference in this movement? I don't even know if that was your question. Sorry for that tangent.
No, have you had any successes with the Innocence Project in terms of stories about getting people out of prison who were not supposed to be there in the first place?
Yeah, all of our work was really with the local jail. So we didn't do much work with the prisons. We would sign them to letters, but our work was really focused on the local jail, because we know that when people are in jail, they have like the chances of fighting your case well in jail, it's very low compared to when you're in a community and you can meet with a lawyer. So for us, we wanted to limit really get as many people out of jail as we could, so people could be on the outside, and so that we could stop people being funneled from jail to the prison.
Thank you. You mentioned power, influences power. I just became aware of a book today written by a woman by the name of Zoe Chance called, Influence is Your Superpower. So you might want to check into that and see if she teaches at Yale, and she teaches courses on influencing people.
That's so neat. I wonder if like someone as clumsy as I am could actually influence anyone. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna check it out. Oh, define heart. Yeah, Catherine.
I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, Catherine, the short answer is yes. Funding is hard and inequitable in funding spaces. Sometimes people would write a lot of stuff in their grant reports, but also sometimes it's really showing funders how, as a collective, as a coalition, we get more work done than an individual organization could do on its own. Do I face any current challenges? Philanthropy in itself is like racist, right? And so we need more people, more organizers, more people of color, more women getting into those roles and really changing the decision making. I always say my job is to support people on the ground, not to tell them what they're supposed to do. There was a lot of money we passed up because we wouldn't do things the way a funder told us to do it. but I'm really confident in knowing that I know my people, I know how my people move, and I know what's important to us. And so philanthropy has a bunch of problems. I think Borealis does a great job of hiring a lot of people who are directly impacted by the system. And that's why I'm really happy to work with Borealis, because a lot of things that I see from other foundations, I don't see here.
Well, I think we're closing down. And if there are more questions, please put in the chat. And I just want to congratulate you for being a radical truth teller. For this award is about people who stand up and tell the truth, no matter what the cost is. And we want to support you, and we want to be a part of your community and support what you're doing. And to that end, I'm asking everyone, if you can, if it works for you, to donate. And I'm getting ready to put up a tweet soon to tell people on our Twitter to donate. And so if you just check out hashtag Radical Truth Teller, follow Sade on Twitter and Instagram. Are you on Twitter? I had that. Oh, I knew it.
I don't know how to work it. It's a lot. Yeah, Facebook and Instagram are slow enough for me to actually, you can post something on Facebook from 3 weeks ago and it's relevant. Twitter is too fast.
Who ran OPPRC's Twitter?
Not me. I should say that. That was another part of us finally being able to have more funding. Initially, I was very focused on doing the work. I said, I'm doing the work. I don't have time to talk about it. Those other groups can talk about it. But when we had comms people to talk about our work, people were able to see the work more. It increased visibility, and more people were able to join as members or donors. So yeah, comms folks are amazing. I praise them for all the graphics they can make and getting things down to either 150 characters or 250. They are godsends.
It's a real thing. It's a real skill, which I'm not good at. All right. So just thank you so much. Again, Venmo Sade, please.
And thank you, Amber.
Yes, and thank you, Amber, for this
connection. Yeah, super awesome.
And I want to just say to George Mason folks, if you can stay on this link, we're just going to stay here. It's not going to end, is it, Josh?
No, I will stop the recording, or you can start the recording. And then...
You can keep the recording. Can you make me the co-host? And you all, thank you all for being here. And I just hope that we all can, I'm wishing us blessings and asking our ancestors to walk with us as we journey in this work toward abolition and repair. So thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
And follow, what's your social media? Can you drop that in too on your Instagram?
She just dropped it.
Okay, dopeness.
I didn't LinkedIn. I don't know. My social media is all the same. Sade as Dumas. It's so boring. Yeah. All right, y'all. Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
And George Mason folks, stay on. And Josh, you're welcome to stay on as well. Josh is one of our organizers at the Truth Telling Project, and handles a whole lot. We're actually gonna maybe take about 5-minute break.
I'm gonna step out to actually go work on that whole lot real fast, but I will hit you up later. But
okay, cool. All right, talk soon.
I'm gonna make you host and then I'll go.
Okay.
you asked feedback, right? Okay, cool. Just double checking. Um, I don't know about other people, but I thought it was actually super interesting when she was talking about like the logistics of activist work and how like the very real actions that she took that, feel like, while obviously difficult, like it sounds like, other like normal people could do and like approach, which is really cool because, a lot of the time like activists kind of get mythologized where it feels very difficult to enter into the space and like do the thing, but she like did a really great job of like explaining exactly what she did from like a logistics standpoint of like everything, which I thought, super helpful and felt very practical.
And I actually felt a lot of some of the things that were coming up and some of the things that I knew people were thinking about will come up. And um, I want to say that this course is mostly curated. Like we were really intentional about who we were going to bring in and if this all would fit together this way. And I saw like some stuff around fundraising. I saw a lot of stuff. And I want to really hone in on truth telling and just name that, we were to a large extent, I come from this academic background and I was working in as a peace and conflict studies practitioner when Mike Brown was killed. And so initially I was approaching this activism as that, like, all right, maybe I'll write a paper, and somebody hit me up on my cell phone and was like, and this is maybe about a week after Mike Brown got killed, was murdered. And let me turn this fan off. It's too loud. And somebody called me, and it was right after Kajimi Powell was murdered. And I don't know if people were paying attention to that. This was in 2014. But Kajimi Powell was from my neighborhood in North St. Louis, where my parents live. And it was kind of like he was suffering from mental health issues, and everybody in the neighborhood knew him, and he was really upset by Mike Brown's murder. And there weren't protests, but there was a standoff. And for some reason, I just thought, because of the way stuff was happening in Ferguson, that it was just going to explode. And it was this right across the street from my parents' house, where there was a standoff where he was killed at, and community and police. And I'm standing outside my parents' house in the driveway just watching, and somebody called me at the time and asked me what I was doing. And I was just like, I'm here because this is wild and I don't want anything to happen to my family. And he was like, dude, why did you learn this peace conflict stuff anyway? And so it was that entrance for me. And although I had been an anti-war protester, it was like Ferguson represented something very different for me that I didn't understand, because I had this academic background studying nonviolent conflict and studying peace education and all of this philosophy stuff, and it was great, but it was like it was still contained within this colonial structure. of what are acceptable ways to protest. Like I'm literally looking down the street and seeing what I've never seen before at that point, like just people saying fuck the police. And that's also, I think, why I'm okay with the unorthodoxy of how I approach academia, because it was like this background meeting my community again. Because in certain ways, it's not that I wanted to escape. It was like I actually couldn't they didn't want to rehire me at a university I was teaching at near St. Louis. And so Bucknell took me. And so I was like, fuck St. Louis, I'm gone, you know? And so this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you all about, like looking at transitional justice through the lens of a grassroots organization that started it, right? And looking at it outward, right? Because so what we landed on, and I'm gonna just share my screen again. And so this is one of the slides from last class, but I want to bring it back because you all have access to it. And these links, sure. I need to fix that. See if this works. Just thinking. All right. So these links are some of the links to the early kind of thinking that we were doing about truth telling. So we were looking at, and just so you know, like, we were thinking like, okay, we're gonna start something that can be used to create dialogue and figure out like what's next, like when the dust settles, what's next. And that's a real question, because like we were literally, I mean, I guess you had to have been there, but let me just share that it was like I'd never seen the military in my community like that. Just in a little town, like right next to St. Louis, right a part of St. Louis. People go back and forth. Particularly my neighborhood is like North St. Louis. So you got Jennings and you got Ferguson. And so we were literally working together to figure out something, like what's possible. We considered creating a what do you call it, a tribunal. I had friends who had created tribunals or were part of creating a tribunal. And so one of the names that we first came up with it was the National Community Institute on Truth and Reconciliation, Ferguson and beyond. And we were looking at a theory of change. Like we were really thinking through what we were going to do. And I'm sharing this with you because you should know what came before you as you're doing this work, so that that people actually struggle with multiple ways of thinking, about this. And so as you saw, like one of our first descriptions of what we were doing, and we never published this stuff or, edited up, because we were really looking at like, what do we create as a container to move processes forward. And we started as this thing called this the name, the Community Institute on Truth and Reconciliation was the name that we ended up settling on initially. And then we got to the community, and our community folks was like, all right, we don't know about reconciliation. Like literally people's like, fuck reconciliation. But we can start with truth. And we were having all of these conversations with Ferguson activists, residents of Ferguson, St. Louis, Black and white. Those are the racial dynamics mostly for that community. So it was really community led. And so if we think about this as a process within transitional justice, the original sort of, I'm not gonna say original, but one of the primary ways of thinking about truth and reconciliation is through the lens of South Africa. What do folks know about the Truth Commission in South Africa?
Yeah, I thought Leah would jump in. Leah, jump in.
No, Asha, it's on you.
Exactly. I saw you come off mic first. You go ahead.
Oh yeah, this Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa, I think it was the commission that ended the apartheid in the country. So people were telling the truth in exchange to forgiveness. I think that was the whole idea. So they tell the truth about what they did, why they did, and then they ask for forgiveness. So in exchange with, tell me the truth, I will forgive you. I think that was some of.
Yeah, so what, oh, go ahead, Catherine.
I tried to time it until after you were done, after you unmiked yourself, so I could go, oh, I'll go after. Please.
Okay, I'll give you that. So yeah, what really separated the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission from the Truth and Reconciliation work in Rwanda and other places was that it was really, for our modern time, groundbreaking for a break from the punitive approach to harm, right? Because things really came to a head where apartheid was so heavy and the oppression so hard that the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela and all of his people were fighting so hard against apartheid, and that it really, Nelson Mandela ended up, we all know he ended up in prison as a terrorist for fighting against the white colonial, I believe it was the Dutch government, where they were continually oppressing Black people. And it came to a head where Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, they had gained so much power that the white minority feared the Black majority so much that they realized through backdoor negotiations, and actually ended up pulling Mandela out of prison to go through the negotiation process to establish a democracy, a democratic government. And one of the big criticisms of the TRC in South Africa is that it was basically a way for white people to cop out and avoid Black backlash, and basically the fear that if Black people are no longer oppressed, then they're going to become the oppressor and subjugate the white people. So the TRC was a way to peacefully transition government from the white oppressor to a Black democracy. And that was the first actual democratic election, was electing Nelson Mandela. But it was basically a mechanism to transition from an oppressive government to a democratic one. In a nutshell, I think.
Go ahead, Catherine. Thank you. It were like, and I want to hone in on that part of transitioning, right? And also, Asha, I want to hone in on the piece where you're talking about trading truth for forgiveness. Catherine.
One other note about the TRC, I think one of our most recent readings was about how the TRC was very institutionalized from the government-led, whereas I think Charlottesville, I'm sorry, one of the more local communities was removed from the government because of the institutionalized racism within the government and within police forces. So they desired a TRC without police and government bodies. So I just thought that was an interesting contrast to a very statewide, top-down change from South Africa to more hyper-local examples of TRCs.
Word. And that's sort of the point too, because so I want to continue where you left off, Catherine, on the hyper-localized piece, but go back to Asha and Leo's points and really name that it was really also interesting because there's a really another, it can, you know, the criticality, like we go so deep into this because, you know, why was Nelson Mandela let out and not the other folks? When Winnie, right, was out there organizing in certain ways that the South African government didn't like. And, you know, even, you know, South Africa's still in the picture because we have one of the benefactors of South African diamonds, Jeff Bezos. No, not Jeff Bezos.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Elon.
Right, going to the moon and shit and trying to colonize space, but that to a large extent the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about maintaining the state. I just want to underline this point that truth commissions, when they're allowed to happen, can bring forth some justice, right? And we deepen the concepts of forgiveness, and we started to explore reconciliation and trauma and the power of truth telling as a dramatic reorienting us to what's happening, peace as a society, right? But there's this other part where the diamond industry, like there was massive movements around the world boycotting South Africa. They couldn't do business. Right, and so when we go back to Sade's talk about prisons, right, around business, like I think we really have to hold capitalism as a deeply troubled system that's about taking from somewhere else, extracting, right, for a few people and extracting in any way. And then just the notion of reconciliation, a lot of, we were actually in that same room. I was co-authored an article with, in a book with Arthur Romano around systemic humiliation. And I think that's one of your readings. And during the book launch, I believe it's Nelson Mandela's grandson stood up and he was talking, because I believe he was at the Carter School, and he talked about the problem with reconciliation. And I said, yeah, right, because I think that we get there really quickly before we actually deal with the truth and what are the implications of the truth, which is why transitional justice involves truth telling, truth seeking, criminal prosecution. I mean, and especially after the apartheid regime with all this traumatic harm. And if we're looking at other truth commissions like the one in Chile after the Pinochet's regime, you know, and we could, like, what if we actually traced culpability and accountability to the roots of like who funded Pinochet and why? So we can think about those pieces right there. And I'm not saying reconciliation, it is necessary for people to talk and heal. And we're gonna think about that as we look at some of the local pieces. And as you know, I want to share how in Ferguson, we straight went to Greensboro and talked to Reverend Nelson, who helped us figure out stuff. And I do want to, I mean, you can all read the PowerPoints, you know that I'm going to talk about some of the framing of truth telling for us as a decoloniality, addressing coloniality, and as really from a perspective of critical race theory, that was looking specifically at like the continued condition of a permanent state of oppression, despite having civil rights legislation. And coloniality dealing with the system, the very system that we're dealing with, the mental framework that wants to reinforce policing in prisons, and that forgives white terrorists easily and punishes Black and brown people for minor offenses. So let me just share a little bit. Leo, you saw this, and he was, the Nelsons were actually going to drop in, but I just want to show a little bit of this clip. And so this is Reverend Nelson and Joyce Johnson, who started the Beloved Community Center, and they were activists during the times of the Greensboro Massacre, which is the reason why we have the Greensboro Commission. And let me just stop this real quick. In 1979, a number of racial justice activists were murdered, and they were murdered in Greensboro, North Carolina, when the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis got together. This is one of the first times on American soil these two groups got together, because if you look at their ideologies, they're supposedly opposed to each other. And this union was a result of the police support. And so I'm going to let them talk about it.
Reverend Dr. Spalding, and Stephanie, as she's allowed us to call her. And thank you, certainly, Eduardo, and your
How's the volume on this?
Daughter, your family, David, others I'm meeting during this process, and Pat Clark, who was a hard-working commissioner during our truth process in the early 2000s. And so I'm just trying to read these names on the screen without my glasses, but just happy to be here in this space with you. I wish I could see all of your faces, but just did knowing that you're here seeking, because that's what we were doing all the while after the events in 1979. And I don't know the degree to which you know the background of what brought about the truth process. I'll let Nelson go through some of that, and I'll begin with one of the essential questions that was put before us. What in the world is a truth process? I can remember some games we played when I was a kid. True, dare, consequence, follow up, repeat. And I know most of you never played that, but there were different TV shows and all that talked about truth. Are they telling the truth, or is this a lie? You're supposed to be able to discern what the truth and the non-truths were. It gets harder and harder these days when we have a society that seems bent on basing its beliefs, its actions, its well-being for one another on falsehoods. But we brought this process into being actually about 20 years after a tragic incident that happened on November 3rd, 1979, when Ku Klux Klan and members of the Nazi Party, American Nazi Party, came together with the firm support and urging of police officers and owners of textile mills and the powers that be in our town at that time. And the results from that were that five organizers, five primarily labor organizers, were killed in broad daylight in 88 seconds.
With 4 television stations filming the whole thing.
While we were at a rally that had been legally convened, we had our children there who were 7 and 8 years old at that time, as did many other community individuals have their children there, because we were having a coming together, a unifying effort, particularly in the South, North Carolina, of Black and white at that point. There were not as many apparent Latino residents, though there were some. But we came together to primarily fight around equity in the workplace, equity in pay, safety, access to promotion, and in an equitable education system, because that's so dear to most of us who are poor and working people, that our children have an opportunity, the best opportunity to survive and thrive in this society. But anyway, I'm skipping over some pieces. You can ask me about things you're interested in later. But as we were gathering for that march and rally, singing songs, etc., there are videos of it, because as Nelson said, there were 4 TV stations there that we had invited. Klan rode through. Police, though they were supposed to be there, were not in place and shot these 5 people and wounded 10 other people, including Nelson. And this really terrorized that neighborhood. We call them the housing projects here. Those are poor, primarily African-American neighborhood on a Saturday morning. And the city was basically terrorized. Though we were the victims of it, we now call ourselves survivors. We were blamed for everything. And if you've read anything about the 50s and the 60s, how these things happened, those who went down on freedom rides, etc., were blamed for what had happened. But the good thing is that despite all of that tragedy, that hurt, that pain, we were so committed to what we were doing that those of us in the Worker Viewpoint organization continue to fight for justice. And that is what's gotten us thus far along the way. We tried many things. We had our own, we tried to do, different trials, and whether we did win a little modicum of a settlement after 3 trials. 2 trials had all white juries. No one was found guilty, as in 0, no one. And then a 3rd trial that we pursued with a lot of support from around the country, just begging for nickels and dimes to pay for the trial. We then finally had some level of justice when that federal civil rights suit for wrongful death came to the conclusion that the Klansmen, the Nazis, and the police were jointly liable for wrongful death. This is significant because this had never happened in this country before. Usually police are colluding with Klan Nazis, white supremacists, and they hide their hands. And everybody kind of knows that the sheriff probably was part of it, but this was the first time it was proven in court. So we persisted with this. And finally, we decided, based on looking around the country, around the world, that a truth process is what was needed because people were thoroughly confused about really what had happened in their own town, even with the TV cameras there. So that's just a little backdrop. But again, what is a truth process? It's really kind of what.
Let me just note, people were thoroughly confused about what happened in their town, even though they had 4 television stations filming it.
Says it's a creative way to seek the truth about what really happened, and not just what happened on the incident, you know, who pulled what trigger and that type of thing, but what are the circumstance, the background, the history, the historical truths that led to the situation. Who were the economic powers, the political powers, the folks who control the narrative, the media piece. And we were led to do this truth process. As I said, we looked at South Africa, we looked to Peru and other places. But also, essentially, the courts had failed us. The things we learned in school just were not happening. The courts had failed us. The media had failed us because the media, despite having been there, told a story that just wasn't true. So after a while, even people who were there started doubting what they had seen and what they had experienced. And we're seeing that now. When you hear that January 6th was really just a little tourism thing. People were just at the Capitol to tour. It wasn't like it was any insurrection or whatever, no matter what you saw on the TV. And some of us laugh at that and say, how can anybody believe that? But believe me, if people continue to hear falsehoods, there's going to be a significant number of people who believe it, partly because they're predisposed with the historical untruths, the lies, and the perceived advantages that they might get from believing the truth. So the truth process is a creative way to set the record straight, but beyond that, to provide a means for some level of justice coming forth. Most of the time, truth processes really focus on lifting up the voices, really searching for the voices of those who have been victims of some level of abuse, be it physical like we were, political, whatever's happened. And you, around the world, you've seen that come out of processes where there might have been some transition of government, perhaps through a civil war or something like that. But people do, as Eduardo reminded us earlier, get harmed during those processes. Truth processes are typically convened by governments, but some are not. Ours was not. In fact, our local city council voted vehemently against our process. Or a truth process can be a hybrid. We had anticipated that ours would be a hybrid as we pushed for this, because, you know, we're pushing for truth and reconciliation. Who does not want the truth and reconciliation? Well, we found out that a lot of people did not. But most people did. But we had to push for that. But we'd hoped that our government, our local government, would absorb this process and really institute these changes. Well, they did, but guess what? As it is in the struggle, we had to push every step of the way. But the good news is that we were an organized community group, and therefore we persisted even over the years. So we would not have been able to do that had we not had the support of the Archbishop Tutu and Reverend Dr. Story, Reverend Alex Borain, many others out of South Africa, and then those in Peru. We just met with people.
Eduardo,
Yes, to be concrete. Eduardo, as he says, ended up spending 18 and a half years in this country. I think he came to visit to be supportive, and yet he stayed, and we appreciate that he's back home now in Peru, but still on this path. So I'm going to turn it over to Nelson now and say that, just to summarize, the truth process usually grows out of some need for justice, some need for the voices of those who've been marginalized to be heard, and a great need for that justice to take traction in the vast majority of people to get what we've come to call now community truth. I think we might have gotten that term from Eduardo as well. Community truth, where the false narratives, and we are familiar in this country now with false narratives. The false narrative can be corrected, and people can together build out a way that they can move forward in a more just and life-giving, as opposed to life-threatening manner from there. So Nelson, if you will take it up from there and talk a little bit about some of the concrete steps that we took, and then maybe touch on the new endeavor we have.
Okay.
And move from there.
There's a lot of trauma in our nation, and it's not obvious to a lot of people. The South still suffers from the trauma of the war that it lost between the war and the states, between the states. And it has not healed from the deep wounds of our yesterdays. So what happened in Greensboro was a reflection of that unhealed trauma exploding in our city. And I just want to add that it's not just the South, it's the nation. It has some wonderful things in it, but this idea that it is exceptional, that is above and beyond all other people that ever existed, is simply not true. That it came here and defined the people who were already here as savages. That doesn't make you a great nation. And then push them off the land and massacre them in ways that the history books do not adequately record. And that it, 100 years before the Declaration of Independence, enslaved masses of Black people brought from Africa. All of that is part of the wounds in the nation from our yesterdays. And so these things pop up and they don't come from nowhere. They come from stuff that's buried within the culture of the nation. And it's been my view that if the nation had dealt reasonably with some of its history, that Greensboro would never have happened. That Klan and Nazis, egged on by the Greensboro Police Department and collaborated with them, gave us a parade permit and said they would meet us there to escort the march, but stayed away, and the Klan and Nazi came and just murdered people and little children running around in public housing community, seeing bodies laying on the ground with their blood soaking into the soil, and they didn't even get a day off from school, just went back to school on Monday. That shows something about the internal character of the nation. And it's my view that if we had dealt with that, we being Greensboro, I include myself in there, adequately when this happened, it may have touched something in the nation that would prevent the tsunami of falsehood that is now washing over the nation and increasingly pitting people against each other. And with tens of thousands of people running up on the Capitol.
All right, I'm gonna stop this and I'm gonna drop this link in the chat and I'll put it up also on whatchamacallit, on Blackboard too, so you all can see this. this and the questions and the conversations were brilliant. And I just wanted to bring this to your attention because it's going to be an important source. So, so I'll pause there and just ask everybody to breathe, because I'm, when I think about this and think about that, I just get really, it's intense to deal with. So just, you want to just take a deep breath in and out. What's coming up for you?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. A lot of things come, a lot of things come up, I think, all day in class, but I think from this, there was something that was said, the truth process grows out of, the need for justice for the voices of those who've been marginalized. And it just really keeps bringing me back to the work that I've done, being rooted in like advocacy for survivors of various types of, crime, and really just seeing that as victims of certain things, just wanting support and being in validation for their experiences, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about, that a occupation, had to be developed just to help people feel supported in their experiences or to validate their experiences, because, specifically marginalized voices were just so silenced or not believed when it came to such harsh levels of crime. And again, like this career has been based on creating safe spaces for people to feel vulnerable, to share that truth. So for the last 10 years, right, it's just been absorbing so many different stories. That's why this means so much to me, I think, because for the last 10 years, I've probably absorbed hundreds of stories of truth from people who have not been able to find that validation elsewhere. And you just see how powerful it is just to be able to be that voice when it comes to the criminal justice system or getting support in other areas in the community. And it just really kind of resonates so heavily that this is something that's been rooted back to even slavery, where, I see advocacy being rooted in, Black female slaves were advocating for themselves against the rape of their, white slave owners, but then not getting anywhere because of their identity. And therefore these, white advocates had to come in and take that place to kind of help show that this was an important thing and this was actually happening. So it's like they needed to have these white female voices advocate for these Black females, because just because they were Black, they were not being seen or understood or heard. And, now advocacy is, developed into so many different things, but I think it's interesting just how our work is still so rooted in still needing to create spaces for victims to be heard, especially those vulnerable and marginalized voices. So it just kind of, it's bringing up all those things and kind of why I think this is so important for me. And I even got more involved in restorative justice from working with so many victims who wanted that process as well, right? Where in the realm itself, or the field itself, it's actually, you're almost taught against it in a way, is that like this is something that victims or survivors would not want. But if you're actually listening to the victim survivors themselves, that is very opposite from what I was actually hearing time and time again in different states that I worked in, different environments that I worked in, the child welfare system, and working with survivors who are dealing with CPS and being forced to put their, maybe partners in prison just because to keep their children in the home, right? And just trying to find ways to advocate for them within CPS or within the court system to kind of give them that voice. And yeah, it's a lot of things and very interesting, maybe all over the place, but I think it just kind of brought up a lot of that, how it's just so important, and telling the truth, hearing these stories just really impacts a lot of the work. And yeah, I don't know, but thank you for sharing. Yeah.
No, I think that's really right and dead on. And one of the groups that turned into a Truth Commission was Black Women's Blueprint. I don't know if folks heard about them, but in 2015, they finished a Truth Commission around violence against Black women. And it was violence against Black women throughout the diaspora. And they were able to get or part of getting the recertification on what is it, Title IX, where schools have to report and people have to the reporting requirements around violence against women and sexual assault.
Yes. Mhm.
And I was also gonna name something else that I completely forgot. Hold on just 1 second, you all. Sorry about that. I just, and also just to name that, like, there's not one right way to do this kind of truth process, and that it can be used. So there's a concept of truth. And I want to name that Frantz Fanon describes colonization as anti-truth. So it's really interesting. Like, we're talking about a system that relies on telling you that the sky is actually green, right? And shift an entire world, which is why the title of Chinua Achebe's book is Things Fall Apart, one of his most famous books. And so, like, what does that mean? Like, what Reverend Nelson is also talking about in that is like the way that the system is maintained is through anti-truth as well. So this is why, states often want to get involved. And what he didn't say is that the City Council of Greensboro also tried to create another truth commission, but they had mobilized people and the people were not having it. Right. And so, like, there's all these things. And then even though there's criticality around South Africa for its failure to address reparations and the vast economic gap, and even that conversation is deeply problematic too, like the economic gap part, right? While it's real, so yeah, there's that piece around that limited piece of reparations, and that I think what's so interesting too is that they were able to overcome their work or the opposition for their work by having people like Bishop Tutu, who came out and supported them. And what I wanted to share is at the Truth Telling Project, I'm going to also put a link to this as well. Greensboro helped us create our mandate, and determine the scope of what the Truth Commission was going to be about. And so my computer's running hella slow right now. And so it's really interesting, like the way truth commissions and movements are created and come together. They both rely on like the galvanizing of community, and something that helps that is people like Bishop Tutu and people who are going to come to your aid, and which is why a lot of you want to get somebody famous or whatever, but that's important. And I'm not going to share my screen, it's just too hard because that point is not that necessary. I was going to share the mandate and declaration that they helped us to create, but I'll make sure to put it up on Blackboard. So if you don't see it, remind me. But I think the point that I wanted to get to was I think the importance of movement, and what Greensboro is working on now is they're trying to create a state coalition for the entire state to have a truth process. And they've been traveling from city to city, talking to people and doing that. And one of the other pieces I want to point out is that there are currently over 55 truth processes happening around the country right now. There's over 400 reparations processes happening in local communities, the initiatives that groups have started. And then there's even more places, localities that are ruminating around this, because as Reverend Dr. Nelson, the Nelson said, is that if the United States would have dealt with this early on, could you imagine like what might have happened if after the Civil War, like Reconstruction happened and there was a national truth process around the gross crimes of humanity that happened during slavery and reparations for slavery as well? Or what about at the end of Jim Crow with the Civil Rights era? And so one of the ways that we're trying to, as a project, support communities is we work with Think Peace at George Mason, and we also work with Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. And we are, between us three as a coalition, we're supporting 25 truth commissions around the country. One of the truth commissions, for instance, is Iowa City. And just as another example of like movement building, you know, one of the ways that they were able to continue because their process was really politicized. The chair of the Truth Commission is migrant from Mali, and he was arrested after a city council meeting. And one of the things that we did was we got a letter together for their city council in support of them. And after that letter, essentially the city council renewed their truth commission and funded them. So there's a lot of harm that we're addressing in the work of truth telling and trauma that's being uncovered. There's so many dimensions of it. And yet, like, you know, people are in this, people are organizing, and people are making changes, and folks not like the Nelsons and even Bishop Tutu responded to us and wrote us a letter of support when we started our truth telling project in Ferguson. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are questions, comments that are coming up at this point.
For me, I think one thing that's lingering and I think intersects with a lot of these other concepts that you're talking about is what they were talking about media. And I'm just like wondering how to engage with media in a better way when we're doing these processes. Because even since like Ferguson, like it's only been like 8 years, but the media landscape has already drastically changed again. So it's like, I think we need to think of like best practices or like new ways to address how all of these processes engage with media. Because like, I don't know, just from my work, what I've noticed is like, it feels like the slowest people to change when it comes to how we think about media and like public messaging is activists and like nonprofit organizations, like most of the time we're like really slow at adapting to the times. So I don't know, I'm just like thinking like, I mean, obviously the answer is like get someone who's good at comms, but like, you know, what does it look like from a best practices to like, how do we integrate media with truth telling, and like are there ways that we need to be integrating these things better?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a problem that we all have, you know, and I would like for us to like, that's why I wanted us to engage, you know, various forms of media for this class. And I also want us to experiment. Well, what are some social media strategies around something that we can do? And you know, like, let's experiment. Like one of the ways that we get to our freedom is praxis, right? Like we have the stories of the past, we have the literature and the knowledge, we have each other, and we have what we can try. And that's what movement work is in general. But I wholeheartedly agree, and I have some thoughts about it. But and then Shane said it makes me think about human libraries and having platforms that just use personal stories to educate each other. Hell yeah. I mean, one of the things that we created right after Ferguson, after the series of hearings that we did, is a thing called It's Time to Listen, which is a learning platform. And we went around to schools around the country and shared the platform, which was really stories and then lesson plans that interrelated with themes that were coming up in the stories. And that's also another particular project that people might want to work on or take a look at. And we're just about to relaunch it, so I can share stuff with you as well. So I want you, as we do this class, to see everybody that you encounter as a potential resource, as somebody that you can potentially work with or reach out to for questions. So I hope this is going to be helpful for folks, and I will pause there. And if folks need further assistance from me, hit me up. I will have one-on-ones as people request it. As well, you'll get some feedback from me in the next couple of days. Go ahead, Asha.
Yeah, this is a private question, so I wanted to let you know before you leave. I will be staying just for 1 or 2 minutes.
Cool. Go ahead, Catherine.
I have a question about the assignment timelines.
Mhm.
I don't have the syllabus right in front of me. For the assignment number 2, which is the final draft or final version of our, what are they?
It's due June the 10th.
Tutorial. Oh, June 6th.
June
So
10th.
that's
10th.
June.
I actually
June.
changed the date
Oh,
to
okay. I have the old one then.
yeah. So yeah, I thought I updated it, but I'll make sure I update it. So thank you for asking about that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I definitely have an old version.
Yeah. Okay. All right, y'all. It's been a pleasure seeing you all again. I'll see you all soon. You all know when the next class is. It's not this link.
It's 9 o'clock.
It's my computer announces what time it is, because I will literally be at this computer and forget what day it is and what I'm supposed to be doing. All right, such a pleasure. I'll be in touch. And Asha, if you want to stay on, I'm gonna stop recording.